Hi everyone, in this video we're going to be doing some soil comparison. We're going to be trying out some cheap potting mix and compost versus the most expensive potting mix and compost. We're going to be shopping at Bunnings as that's one of the main outlets for Aussie gardeners to shop at. This soil comparison, I will not be adding any of my own fertilizers, no mulching, no liquid feed. This is purely based on the soil performance on its own. And here we found the cheapest compost, Garden Basics compost at $4.98. I'll just put on the main details on the screen, you can pause the video if you like. Over here we found our most expensive compost, Scott's Compost Premium Soil Improver at $9.98. And here we have the cheapest potting mix, Garden Basics Premium Potting Mix, $4.98. There was one slightly cheaper, but we're gonna match premium with premium. And here we are with the most expensive potting mix, Scott's Premium Potting Mix, at $13.98. And for this soil comparison, we're going to be going with potatoes. We're going to go with some first earlies Sebago. Here we are back at home, and here we have side by side the cheapest potting mix and the most expensive potting mix at Bunnings. And here we have the cheapest compost and most expensive compost at Bunnings. Note that both the cheapest are both Garden Basics and the most expensive are both Scott's. And we are just going to be planting in the bags, but we will take out half of it and put it in a pot. This soil looks pretty good. I would say this is a good soil. With the cheaper potting mix, it looks a bit drier, a little bit more woody. We use the larger potatoes for the bags and the smaller ones in the pot. Now moving on to the compost. The cheap compost seems brown, very woody. Visually it doesn't look that good. And the expensive compost looks good, but it looks a bit woodier than its potting mix counterpart. I'm going to mark up the potatoes in the pots so I don't forget which one is which, in case I have to move them around. And this one I was actually going to separate it, but I'll just add it in here, so I'll just call this a bonus clip. So we're going to be using the cheap potting mix with worm casting. So this small bag is for indoor, but there's an outdoor one which is much cheaper in larger amounts. And what we're going to do is just be mixing it into the bags. And the worm casting looks pretty fine. Not as dark as I thought, more on the brown side. And here we are. We have the expensive soils in the middle and the cheapest ones on the outside. Here we are a couple of weeks later. Things are starting to sprout. They look okay. A bit hard to judge right now. But it looks here the cheap compost is actually ahead of everyone else. And with the bonus one, it is actually taking the lead. And is the healthiest as well. And here we are a couple of weeks later. Now we can see some major differences between the plants. And even to my surprise, the expensive soil are actually not performing as well. The cheaper one's actually showing more growth here. And if we look over here, the cheap compost, it's actually far ahead of the rest. And it's got pretty dark leaves. And then we have the expensive compost. The plant is doing alright in the bag. The one in the pot, not so much. It's also a bit light in color as well. But besides that, there's no other issues. And if we look at our expensive potting mix, this one's actually the worst. Similar to its compost counterpart, the leaves are also slightly light. Not as dark as I would expect. And we have the cheap potting mix. This one's doing okay. It is doing better than both the expensive bags. Leaf color is fair, not too dark, not too light. And the bonus one with the worm casting, it is a bit behind in growth in terms of the cheap compost, but this one is the healthiest one with the thickest stems. But obviously we added the worm casting. And here we are a couple of weeks later. We have some interesting things going on here. Our cheap compost was growing the fastest with the darkest leaves. But I think we have a problem over here. So the rest of the plants haven't changed too much. But we have some major changes over here with the cheap compost. So I've never actually seen this with the potatoes before. And any potatoes I've ever grown. The leaves are kind of curling with a brownish red tip. Over here it is much worse. It is completely curled up. I don't know what the cause of this. Maybe heat stress with the soil. It could be a disease or virus. I'm not too sure. But the plant is trying to regrow back again. But we do have some potatoes here. A couple little spots. And over here with the cheap potting mix, it's doing okay. Grew a little bit. And with the expensive compost and potting mix, they have not progressed any further since the last update. And I've tried to look for potatoes, but haven't seen any yet. And our bonus plant here, doing okay. It stopped growing after it flowered. But we do have some potatoes here growing. A couple of weeks later, I had to move these over here. Again, progress is not much different. Potatoes usually stop growing after they flower. But we do have some interesting things happening here. Cheap potting mix is the same. Expensive potting mix the same. Expensive compost the same. And for the cheap compost, looks like the one in the pot is starting to die off. The one in the bag though, it's still trying to regrow. And here we are a week later. Some of the leaves are getting some mold from the rain, which is fine. We're nearing pretty much the end of this. The cheap compost in the pot, the plant is completely dead. But we still have the cheap compost in the bag that's still trying to regrow, even at 14 weeks. Here's our bonus plant. A bit of mold on the leaves, that's fine. And here we are at week 17. We are going to be harvesting the potatoes and seeing what the results are. At this stage, most of the plants have died off. The only plant that still has enough green leaves is the cheap compost in the bag that's been trying to regrow, and cheap potting mix, which is pretty interesting. So judging just based on the foliage alone, it looks like the cheap ones did the best, while the expensive ones did kind of terrible. Anyway, it's time for the reveal. We are first going to be looking at the cheap potting mix, which is $5. The growth was okay. Not too bad, but not the best. We're going to be checking the bag first and follow it up with the pot. So it looks like we actually got some spuds here. That's not bad at all for a $5 mix. and onto the pot. So this one was about slightly smaller, but let's see what we get. Looks like we got some decent small spuds here. And this doesn't look too bad. I will be weighing them all together at the end. Now we have our $14 expensive potting mix. The growth was very poor. Though the soil does look good. And look at that, it looks like we have a spud. Surprisingly, I wasn't expecting anything for how small the plant was. It seems a tiny plant was able to produce some 2 decent sized spuds. And onto the pot, which is very, very tiny. It seems like it produces a tuber, so let's have a look. And here we are, we have 1 tuber. Now onto the $10 expensive compost. The growth was somewhat okay, but mostly poor. Now let's have a look at what we've got. And we got a few tubers here, not too bad. This looks like a decent production from this okayish plant. And now onto the pot. This one was a small plant. But it seems we have a tuber. A decent sized tuber. Now onto the $5 cheap compost. This did have the best growth minus the bonus one, but we did run into a issue where the plant got sick or stressed and had to regrow, which isn't a good sign. The soil might have had enough nitrogen, but microbial life wasn't the best there, causing the plant to stress out in a certain condition. Well, we did get some decent potatoes here. Now onto the pot. It looks like we got some decent potatoes here too. Now for the bonus bag with the cheap potting mix with worm casting. And do note that the worm casting is like a fertilizer soil conditioner, so it will be much better than the rest of the bags. And looks like we got some nice looking spuds here. These are good size. This one I'm definitely happy with the result. Just with the worm casting alone, there is noticeable size difference already. And now onto the pot. Seems we have some decent spots here. And here we are, we have finished harvesting all the potatoes for the soil comparison. Just before we weigh it off, here is a visual look at it. So we can see here the cheaper bags, which are both the same brand, did slightly better than those grown in the expensive soil, which has the smallest yield. So this goes to show that even if it's expensive, it's not going to give you the best result. But there could be a lot of factors into this. Maybe the soil might be too heavy in nutrients. Over-fertilization is a thing. It didn't go in favor of the potato. Maybe these soils just didn't work in a higher temperature. But those are just a few excuses for the expensive ones. Even though something like this could have happened, I was expecting the expensive one to do at least better than the cheap one. It's completely flipped around. We're going to be weighing all these potatoes. Starting off with the cheap potting mix, we're going to see what kind of yield we got from the two plants. So it looks like we got a total of 448 grams. And with the expensive potting mix, our yield is a measly 176 grams. Now onto the $5 cheap compost. Looks like the yield is 460 grams. Now onto the expensive compost. We got a yield of 374 grams. Not too bad. Much better than its potting mix counterpart. Now onto our little bonus plant, the cheap potting mix with the worm casting. Let's see the yield for this one. So from the two plants, it produced 761 grams. Anyway, let's ignore the results from the bonus plant because obviously we added the worm casting in there. Let's look at the original four. So we have the expensive compost, which is $10 versus the cheap compost, which is $5, and the yield was slightly less. If we look at the expensive potting mix at $14 versus the cheap potting mix at $5, there was major difference between the yields. Now out of the two best, the cheap compost and the cheap potting mix, we're gonna have to go with the cheap potting mix as the winner. Even though the cheap compost is a few grams heavier, we're gonna take some points away for that plant because of its little issue it had during the growing season where the plant looked stressed or disease or some viral infection. So we'll just go with our winner, the cheap potting mix. Hope this little soil comparison video experiment has helped you guys out, especially the Aussie audience. But if you have these brands around your country too, this will help you out. But yeah, again, this goes to show not the expensive one isn't always the best one. Sometimes the expensive one could be overdone. All those stats on the thing, the soil has to have a fair balance of nutrients and other things to actually grow properly. Too much things in the soil, too much fertilizer, it's detrimental to the plant's health. I might be doing some more of these in the future. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed that video and thanks for watching.